We're getting towards the end of May now, and I'm starting to get, I don't know about excited, but yeah, excited about the start of the river fishing season, June the 16th. And as ever, there are still people banging on about get rid of the close season on rivers and streams and drains. We want to get on them all year round. So what's the rights and wrongs of that? Would it make a lot of difference? Should we do what we've already done on the canals and still waters, get rid of the close season? And would it be any good? The close season came in back in about 1876 or something. And for some reason, West Midlands anglers have been banging on about it ever since. I got evidence, certainly from the 60s. Get rid of it, we want to do it. And they even had ways round it. Fish with worms with a hook, say you're fishing for eels. Yorkshire anglers used to be able to fish maggots for trout, float fishing with a stick float, catching anything but trout, I dare say. And I can see in the old days when you couldn't fish a still water, there was a lot of frustration. 3 months when you couldn't go fishing unless you took up fly fishing on maybe a reservoir for rainbow trout. You may have fly fished on a river if you were lucky, or you went sea fishing. For years, anglers went across to Ireland to fish over there. And there were a few loopholes as well. You could fish at Whitsun in the Norfolk Broads, I think. Lincolnshire then had a still water. You could fish in still waters in Lincolnshire when you couldn't fish elsewhere. And in the southwest, Cornwall didn't have any waters with coarse fish, so they never bothered with a coarse fish close season. And then eventually people started to stock a few waters, clay pits right down in Cornwall. And then when Cornwall got put together with Devon to form the South West Water Authority, you could fish in Devon in the rivers as well as the still waters. So from Dorset, it was about 70 miles to get down to Exeter, and I fished the River Exe, the Exeter Canal, and some still waters down there in the spring, all perfectly legally. Needed a local rod license. And then eventually the national bylaws came in, and we've got the situation now for the last 30 years. You can fish still waters and canals unless they're under a triple SI, and the rivers, streams and drains are all closed for 3 months. That, in a nutshell, is it. I've called this the roach fishing paradox. And the weird thing is, I do plenty of fishing in the spring on still waters that have got roach, and I catch roach in the spring from these still waters. And recently it was obvious the roach was spawning around about the 8th of May, frantically thrashing around in the willow roots. And the fish that I was catching hadn't yet spawned, so all fat with spawn. And a couple of days later, there's still a bit of spawning going on, but all the roach I caught were empty of spawn. Didn't seem to get virtually no males, the ones that are rough to touch with the tubercles on their heads. And at the moment, the rudd are still waiting to spawn. And by the time you watch this, they may well have spawned. And the reason I say that about catching lots of roach in the spring is that on the rivers where we generally can't fish till June the 16th, although, like I say, I did fish the River Exe years and years ago in the spring, but we had the odd skimmer. I think that was about it. The canal was better down there, caught roach, perch and skimmers. And it was interesting how we caught roach at first in March, and then in April, once they sort of got interested in spawning, they vanished, just caught perch and skimmers. But on the rivers, after June the 16th, it's usually reckoned that roach fishing is slow. The chub, if you can catch them, have usually spawned and pretty sort of black and horrible, spawned out, often shoaled up in big shoals, hungry but lean, out of condition, need a few weeks of hard feeding. Now the roach obviously shoal up to spawn in the rivers, and if you were to fish for them in April and May, you would be looking for those concentrations of roach. After spawning, what roach tend to do in the rivers is they spread right out very thinly. They're not shoaled up. Later in the summer, in sort of end of August, September, October, the roach tend to, the shoals form from the sort of spread out fish, and then the shoals start to congregate together. So you get the roach hotspots, often accompanied by pike just about everywhere around them. But that roach fishing, it's hard to, even if you find the roach, it's hard to get them to bite. They're not interested much in hempen tears. You get the odd fish on it. More likely to get them on maggots or casters, maybe bread. But they're just not that interested. And yet on the stillwater, fishing maggots and casters, the roach are very hungry. So if we were able to fish in the spring on the rivers, would it actually be any good? I think some of the fishing would be quite good up until the end of April, maybe. The dace would have spawned in March and they'd come back in April, and they're one of the fish species that you can catch on the rivers at the start of the season in June. They're totally back to normal. If you've got dace fishing, you'll find them. It's not the best of the dace fishing. That's often quite good in September. I've had some very good dace fishing in September and October. But the dace are normal. They're not spawned out or anything. They've had a few weeks of recovery. So I think what you'd find is the roach fishing was okay, chub fishing was okay in April. But then in May into June, I think it would become very patchy. And this begs the question to those people who say, oh, we want to get rid of the close season because they want to match fish on the rivers all the year round, is what would your matches be like? Would they be okay in March and April, but increasingly very peggy? In other words, you're either on a pile of fish or next to nothing because all the fish had shoaled up to spawn, and then just plain hard because you couldn't find any fish. The fish are all just spread out, not much interested. Would it be any good? And that's the paradox question. Is it going to be any good? Bream, I don't know. On rivers, I've caught plenty of bream in Ireland, on the Shannon, on the famous Patchy stretch in, I think it was about the end of May that we fished there, May into June. The fish were shoaled up on the shallows. We knew where they were, and you cast in and you pulled out bream all day. We didn't have massive catches by some standards, but we were getting 30 slabs in a session, which for inexperienced bream anglers with 1970s gear, which wasn't carbon rods and no feeders, just straight bomb and a bit of bread flake on the end, was fairly good. So rushing to say get rid of the close season, it's bound to be good, is not necessarily true. Could we find out by an experiment? Possibly. Would the stretches, now the stretches I fish are mostly the unfished bits. I look for the quiet bits of water, the bits that aren't hammered. But there are a few stretches of my local style that get hammered quite hard in matches. And I wonder whether those stretches would improve in the long term because there was more match fishing pressure due to losing the close season. I think they would get worse. I don't think they get better. I think the stretches that are virtually unfished, I don't think it would make a slightest bit of difference whatsoever. I think you'd fish it in May or June, you'd catch some fish, little or no effect. But the stretches where the fish didn't get a chance to unlearn not being caught, if you get my drift, in other words, a few weeks to forget what being caught was about and become catchable again, then maybe those stretches would just get harder and harder and harder. So that's worth thinking about as well. So possibility of mediocre sport and the fishing getting harder. Maybe that's what would happen. Certainly history shows on rivers like the Witham, going back 50 years when there were massive opens, very few at the start of the season, the sort of first match of the season might be 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th of June. There'll be very few roach caught, and then what would win the match would depend just how bad it was. It could be as little as 3 or 4 bream for sort of 10 or 12 pound, or someone could be on an absolute pile and get 40 pounds, which was a huge weight then, and a lot of anglers struggling to get a bite. But certainly not at its peak. And I think this is the lesson, even with the close season, is to not expect too much at the start of the season and give it 2 or 3 weeks to settle down and improve as the fish get back to normal with their feeding. The roach shoal up a little bit, get used to feeding on what you want to catch them on. Not quite sure what they're feeding on at the start of the season, but it's not always our baits. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.